The camera always loved Diane Lane. It adored the soft sweep of her cheekbones, the quicksilver way her eyes could shift from tender to defiant, the smile that, at least to the public, seemed to promise she'd never truly been broken. But beauty has a way of becoming its own prison, and for Diane, the image she projected was often the furthest thing from her reality. By the time she turned 60, she had lived through more upheaval than most actresses of her generation: parental abandonment, the disorienting vertigo of childhood fame, a teenage runaway episode that left Hollywood baffled, 2 marriages that unraveled in front of the press, and private bouts of despair she never allowed to surface in interviews. In an industry where vulnerability is currency, hers was kept in a vault. She was the teenage prodigy hailed as the next Katharine Hepburn, the luminous ingenue who shared the screen with Laurence Olivier before she was old enough to drive. Critics wrote about her fearless performances as though she had been born with an iron will. The truth was messier. Diane's career had been built on playing women with quiet reservoirs of strength because that's what she had to learn, fast, in order to survive. Hollywood is good at polishing a story until the jagged edges are invisible. What the magazines didn't print was how easily Diane could be crushed under the weight of expectation, how fiercely she clung to her privacy as the one piece of herself that couldn't be taken. She was the good girl in an era of public meltdowns, the actress who never seemed to make a wrong move. But behind the stillness was turbulence, sleepless nights, battles with trust, and the lingering fear that her personal life would always be a source of public entertainment. Her tragedy is not one explosive scandal or single defining fall, it's the slow erosion of a woman's spirit by a business that pretends to worship its leading ladies while quietly dismantling them. At 60, she had achieved what many dream of: fame, wealth, critical respect. But the question that follows her like a shadow is the one this story will try to answer. What did it cost her? How many pieces of Diane Lane had to be sacrificed for the version the world was allowed to see? And when the spotlight finally dims, will there be enough of her left to stand in the dark, unafraid? New York City, January 22, 1965, Diane Colleen Lane entered the world in a place already humming with dreams too big for most to carry. She was born at Columbia Hospital for Women, the only child of Colleen Farrington, a nightclub singer and Playboy model, and Burton Eugene Lane, a Manhattan drama coach with a passion for Shakespeare and an unpredictable temper. From the start, Diane's life was split into fragments. Her parents divorced when she was just 13 days old. She never remembered them together. Instead, her earliest memories were of transit, moving from one apartment to another, being shuttled between households like a small package everyone claimed to love but no one seemed willing to keep. The air in her father's apartment smelled faintly of grease paint and burnt coffee. The walls were lined with scripts and dog-eared plays, each covered in his pencil notes. He spoke to her like she was already an adult, explaining Chekhov and Ibsen as if she were destined to step onto a stage before she could ride a bike. Her mother's world was warmer but less certain, cigarette smoke curling in the light, lipstick-stained wine glasses on the counter, laughter that could turn sharp without warning. "I learned early to read a room before I spoke," Diane would later recall. You figure out how to be invisible until you're sure it's safe. That skill, the ability to vanish in plain sight, would become one of her greatest survival tools in Hollywood. By 6, she was already performing, standing under harsh stage lights in small off-Broadway productions while other children were still learning multiplication tables. At home, her father treated acting not as a game but a duty. "If you're going to do this," he told her once, "you're going to be better than anyone else your age. Or you're not doing it at all." But the pressure came with a cost. Diane's childhood was a patchwork of adult conversations, late-night rehearsals, and moments of deep loneliness. She often stayed alone in the apartment for hours, listening to the city's muffled roar through the window, wondering if her life would ever feel whole. The real fracture came when, at 13, her mother left New York for a modeling job in Europe and didn't take Diane with her. She stayed with her father, who believed in discipline more than comfort, but the absence of her mother left an ache she never spoke about publicly. "When your parent leaves, you learn not to rely on anyone coming back," she once said in an unguarded moment to a friend. The city gave her opportunity, yes, the kind that could catapult a child into the orbit of legends, But it also taught her the first hard truth of her life, that the people you love most might not stay. And as the bright lights of Broadway began to flicker toward her, Diane was already carrying that lesson like a hidden weight. The question was how long a child could hold it before she broke. By the time Diane Lane was 13, she had already lived more lives on stage than many actors twice her age. She had been cast in Joseph Papp's New York Shakespeare Festival, stood in the wings of Lincoln Center watching legends breathe life into words she could barely pronounce years earlier, and was quickly becoming that kid in theater circles, the one adults whispered about, saying she might be the next Meryl Streep if the world didn't ruin her first. But in 1979, the world came calling faster than anyone expected. Director George Roy Hill, fresh off hits like The Sting and Butch Cassidy and The Sundance Kid, was casting A Little Romance, a tender transatlantic love story. He wanted a young actress with more than just a pretty face, someone who could carry innocence and intelligence in the same frame. Diane walked in wearing a thrift store skirt and a nervous half-smile. She read with a quiet clarity that silenced the room. Hill didn't even wait for the other auditions. "That's her," he said. The film paired her with Laurence Olivier, an acting giant whose mere presence could intimidate seasoned performers. On set in Paris, Diane was expected to be poised, charming, and professional, a miniature adult in a world that didn't have time for children to be children. Olivier, famously stern, surprised her with moments of gentle humor. "You have the instincts of an old soul," he told her after one scene. It was the kind of praise most actors would frame on a wall. Diane carried it in her heart like proof she belonged. But belonging came with a cost. While other girls her age were passing notes in class, Diane was navigating press junkets, photo calls, and industry events where she was the only minor in a sea of calculating adults. Publicists taught her to sit a certain way, answer questions without revealing too much, and smile on command even when she was exhausted. Her father, still her guardian, kept a watchful eye on set. But the lines between parental protection and career management blurred. Diane began to sense that her value, even to those closest to her, was tied to her ability to deliver. "I knew they were proud of me," she would later admit, "but sometimes I wondered if they'd still be proud if I walked away." The reviews for A Little Romance were glowing. Time magazine called her the new American sweetheart, a label that thrilled the studio and terrified Diane. Sweethearts were expected to be pure, grateful, and compliant. She was already starting to feel like none of those things. And in the quiet moments between interviews and rehearsals, she felt a tug towards something dangerous, the idea of escape. Of disappearing before this bright, relentless spotlight swallowed her whole. Within 2 years, that impulse would take her farther than anyone expected, and almost cost her everything she had worked for. Los Angeles, 1980, the city was drenched in sun, but Diane Lane was suffocating in the shadows it cast. At 15, she was already a Hollywood commodity, her face printed in 17 magazine and her name whispered by studio executives who wanted to mold her into the next Brooke Shields. She had been cast in Francis Ford Coppola's ambitious new project, The Outsiders, and was shuttling between New York and California for auditions, script readings, and photo shoots. From the outside, it was the dream: glamorous hotels, limousine rides, dinner with producers who treated her like an equal. But behind the smile, Diane was starting to drown. She had no steady school life, no peer group, no privacy. Every adult around her seemed to have an agenda: career advice, contract negotiations, photo opportunities, except for the one thing she needed most: permission to slow down. One night, after another tense argument with her father about her work schedule, Diane packed a small duffel bag. She had no plan, no money beyond a few crumpled bills, just an urgent need to get away. She slipped out into the warm California night and didn't come back. For weeks, she vanished. Some reports later claimed she was hiding out with friends in Florida. Others whispered about a much darker path, that she had been living with a group of older drifters, couch surfing and avoiding anyone who might drag her back into the industry machine. The truth was never fully confirmed, and Diane has always kept that chapter of her life hazy, as if protecting the girl she once was. The gossip spread quickly through Hollywood. Francis Ford Coppola was furious. He had just cast her in Rumble Fish, and now his young star had disappeared. Warner Brothers executives began drafting contingency plans. To the press, her father insisted she was taking a break and would return soon. But privately, he was terrified. After a month, Diane resurfaced. No public explanation, no tearful press conference, just a quiet re-entry into the life she had bolted from. But something had shifted. She had proven to herself that she could walk away if she had to. That realization would follow her into adulthood, shaping the way she approached both Hollywood and her personal life. In interviews years later, she would smile politely when asked about the runaway story, offering vague comments about needing space and figuring myself out. But a friend who knew her then said simply, she wasn't running from the work. She was running from the feeling that she didn't belong to herself anymore. Her return marked the beginning of a new phase, one where the stakes were higher, the roles bigger, and the temptation to disappear always just beneath the surface. And as her star began to rise again, Diane would learn that fame could be both a rescue rope and a noose. By the mid-1980s, Diane Lane had transformed from promising ingenue to Hollywood's latest obsession. After her return from the runaway episode, Francis Ford Coppola doubled down on his faith in her. She appeared in Rumble Fish, 1983, alongside Matt Dillon and Mickey Rourke, then in The Cotton Club, 1984, a lush, ambitious production that surrounded her with the era's most magnetic male leads. Her face, porcelain skin, eyes that carried both innocence and defiance, began to appear everywhere: glossy magazine covers, Vanity Fair spreads, industry most promising lists. Publicists framed her as a cross between the all-American girl and the dangerous beauty. Casting directors saw her as versatile enough to play the fragile love interest, the fiery seductress, or the morally ambiguous anti-heroine. But the momentum came with an unspoken contract. The Diane Lane the industry wanted was not necessarily the Diane Lane she felt herself to be. Public appearances required perfection: hair smooth, makeup flawless, charm unwavering. Studio handlers coached her on sound bites, instructing her to always appear grateful and honored in interviews, even when she was bone-tired. Behind closed doors, she wrestled with the disconnect. On set, she was given the illusion of control. Actors, after all, can choose their characters. Off-set, she felt her personal life shrinking under the weight of expectation. "You start to feel like a product," she once confided to a fellow actor. "If they could put you in a box and sell you, they would." The irony was cruel. Her work was earning her more critical praise than ever, but the more she succeeded, the less free she felt. She was young enough to be seen as malleable, but old enough to know the compromises being asked of her weren't always in her best interest. The press coined her Hollywood's It Girl, a title that reads like a crown but wears like a shackle. It suggested fleetingness, the unspoken rule that an it girl can be replaced the moment the next one arrives. And in an industry where female stars often have a shorter shelf life than their male counterparts, Diane could already feel the ticking clock. It was during this period that she began to make a quiet vow to herself: she would not be defined solely by her looks or her youth. If that meant walking away from certain roles, so be it. But walking away in Hollywood comes with a price, and in Diane's case, it would eventually cost her not just opportunities, but stability in her personal life. Because as the world celebrated her as the dream woman, her reality was about to be defined by the very thing that fame could never protect her from: heartbreak. In 1984, on the set of The Cotton Club, Diane Lane met French actor Christopher Lambert, a rising star with a brooding intensity and a reputation for being both charming and unpredictable. He was fresh off international fame from Greystoke, The Legend of Tarzan, and his accent, old-world manners, and restless energy made him magnetic in a way that felt like an antidote to Hollywood's polished plasticity. The attraction was instant. On location, they would linger over late-night conversations, trading stories about their unconventional childhoods. Both had grown up feeling like outsiders, Diane in the fractured world of New York theater, Christopher between continents, never fully belonging anywhere. That shared dislocation bound them quickly. But they were also from two different worlds in the most literal sense. Diane's life was rooted in the American film system, with its relentless schedules and invasive press. Christopher was based in Europe, working in French cinema, where the pace was slower and the paparazzi less rabid. Their romance unfolded in a blur of transatlantic flights, stolen weekends in Paris, and long-distance phone calls at odd hours. By 1988, they were married in a quiet ceremony, away from the glare of most Hollywood lenses. To outsiders, it seemed like a fairy tale, two actors, both beautiful, building a glamorous life between continents. But almost immediately, cracks began to form. The time zone difference became more than a logistical hurdle, it was an emotional chasm. When you're married to someone who's never in the same country for more than a week, you start to feel like you're writing love letters to a stranger, Diane once told a friend. The tabloid press, however, was less interested in the reality than the imagery. They loved the story, American beauty weds French heartthrob. Glossy spreads of them holding hands can mask the strain of a relationship built on brief reunions and long absences. Every public appearance was framed as confirmation of their perfect marriage, even as both were privately wondering how much of it could be sustained. In 1993, their daughter Eleanor was born, and for a brief time, Diane believed motherhood might anchor them. She was fiercely protective, determined to give Eleanor a stability she herself had never known. But the demands of two international careers, and the weight of living under constant media scrutiny, proved too heavy. By 1994, the marriage was over. The divorce was handled quietly, with no public accusations, but the pain lingered. For Diane, it was her first real public heartbreak, even if she never gave the press the spectacle they wanted. "Some endings don't have villains," she said years later. "They just have two people who ran out of ways to reach each other." The headlines moved on quickly, but the experience left its mark. Diane emerged more guarded than ever, more wary of giving the world anything it could use against her. And yet, just as she began to steady herself, fate would hand her a role that would reignite her career, but at a cost she could never have predicted. By the turn of the millennium, Diane Lane had settled into a quieter Hollywood existence. She worked steadily, a romantic lead here, a character role there, but the red-hot promise of her youth had cooled into something safer, almost subdued. Casting directors still admired her talent, yet the industry seemed unsure of what to do with her now that she was in her mid-30s. Then came Unfaithful, 2002. Director Adrian Lyne, known for erotic psychological dramas like Fatal Attraction and Indecent Proposal, saw something in Diane that Hollywood had neglected, the ability to portray desire and moral conflict without losing the audience's empathy. She was cast opposite Richard Gere as a suburban wife whose impulsive affair with a younger man spirals into betrayal and tragedy. From the first days on set, it was clear this was not going to be a safe, easy role. The script demanded raw vulnerability, both emotionally and physically. Diane would later admit that the love scenes, hailed by critics for their authenticity, left her emotionally drained in ways she hadn't expected. "It's not about the physicality," she said in one interview. "It's about exposing something private in front of strangers, knowing the whole world will eventually see it." The gamble paid off. Her performance was magnetic, a mix of longing, guilt, and quiet devastation. Critics called it the best work of her career. The Academy took notice, nominating her for Best Actress. She walked the red carpet that year glowing in a pale gown, cameras flashing, the media suddenly talking about her again as if she'd just arrived in Hollywood for the first time. But success in Hollywood rarely comes without strings. The acclaim for Unfaithful also brought a new wave of scrutiny into her personal life. Interviewers began probing into her own views on marriage and fidelity, fishing for confessions that might link her to the character she had played so convincingly. Paparazzi followed her to coffee shops, snapping photos of her without makeup, attaching loaded captions about her real-life secrets. Privately, Diane was wrestling with something else, the peculiar loneliness that comes after a career peak. The film had reignited her public profile, but it also set a new bar for the kind of work people expected from her. She began receiving scripts that leaned heavily on the same template, the beautiful wife with a dangerous secret, the woman on the verge of transgression. Hollywood had decided what Diane Lane was now, and it didn't leave much room for the rest of her. Still, she pressed forward, hoping to ride the momentum into more varied roles. What she didn't know was that her next big headline wouldn't come from a movie at all. It would come from her personal life, and it would be far more volatile than any scripted scene. In the early 2000s, Diane Lane met Josh Brolin, rugged, intense, the son of Hollywood royalty but with a restless, sometimes volatile edge. They crossed paths at an industry gathering, where his easy charm and gravel-voiced humor seemed to cut through her usual guardedness. Both had weathered divorces, both were parents, and both understood the peculiar loneliness of life lived in front of cameras. Their courtship was fast, passionate, and, at least at first, intoxicating. Friends remember them at dinner parties leaning into each other's sentences, laughing in a way that made it seem they'd found some long-missing counterpart. She looked lighter, one acquaintance recalled. Like she'd finally found someone who could carry part of the weight. They married in August 2004 at Brolin's California ranch, a rustic, intimate ceremony far from the paparazzi's usual hunting grounds. Diane appeared radiant in photos, and for a brief moment, the narrative around her shifted, from the beautiful, solitary figure to a woman who had found her happily ever after. But just 4 months into the marriage, that image cracked. On December 20, 2004, police were called to their home in Santa Monica. The official report was stark: domestic disturbance, Josh Brolin arrested on a misdemeanor charge. The arrest made instant headlines, and suddenly the same press that had toasted their romance was parsing police records. Brolin's spokesperson called it a misunderstanding, and Diane did not press charges. The couple appeared together at events shortly after, presenting a united front, smiling for the cameras. Yet the incident lingered like a bruise beneath the surface. Those close to Diane say she never publicly discussed the details because she didn't want her marriage reduced to a tabloid spectacle, but privately, the trust between them had been shaken. Still, she stayed. They worked through periods of distance and reconnection, with Diane often traveling for film shoots and Josh pursuing roles that took him far from home. The marriage had its good seasons, red carpet appearances where they looked every bit the Hollywood power couple, and its long winters of tension. By 2013, after nearly a decade together, they quietly filed for divorce. The announcement was brief, almost antiseptic: Diane Lane and Josh Brolin have decided to end their marriage amicably. No public accusations, no drawn-out legal battle, just an ending delivered without embellishment. But the silence left a vacuum, and the tabloids filled it with speculation. For Diane, the experience marked another reminder of a truth she'd learned young: that the public will always want the inside story, even when the cost of telling it is too high. And as she stepped out of that marriage, she faced a cruel double bind. She was once again single in her 40s in an industry that treats women over 40 as nearly invisible. Yet she was not done fighting for her place. What came next would be a quieter war, not against a partner, but against the weight of scrutiny itself. In the months following her divorce from Josh Brolin, Diane Lane found herself under a microscope sharper than any close-up camera lens. It wasn't just the tabloids, though they were relentless, rehashing the 2004 arrest and speculating on the truth behind her decision to leave. It was the internet gossip sites, the comment sections, the anonymous voices that treated her life as a choose-your-own scandal game. Every public outing was dissected. If she smiled on a red carpet, they called it putting on a brave face. If she skipped an event, they suggested she was hiding. If she was photographed walking alone, coffee in hand, the captions inevitably read something like "Diane Lane, lonely in LA." For a woman who had built her career on keeping her private life fiercely guarded, this level of speculation felt like an ambush. She had survived in Hollywood by controlling the narrative. Now the narrative was being written without her, often with more fiction than fact. It's like watching strangers rearrange the furniture in your house, a friend remembers her saying. And you can't tell them to stop, because they think it's theirs. The scrutiny extended to her work. Casting rumors became a sport for entertainment blogs. If she didn't land a major role, they called it a career slump. If she took a supporting part, they framed it as a sign she could no longer carry a film. Even her appearance, the very thing the industry once worshipped, became a target. Side-by-side photos from the 1980s and the present day appeared in then and now slideshows, accompanied by thinly veiled jabs about aging. For Diane, the irony was bitter. She had spent decades avoiding the implosions that claimed other Hollywood careers. No public drunken arrests, no feuds, no leaked scandals, yet she was still reduced to a headline and a guessing game. What the public couldn't see was how exhausting it became to live inside that constant hum of noise. She began turning down interviews unless they were tied directly to a project. She avoided certain public spaces where she knew paparazzi camped out. When fans approached her in restaurants, she smiled and signed autographs, but inside she was counting the minutes until she could leave unnoticed. In that period, Diane learned an unspoken truth of modern celebrity: privacy isn't something you lose all at once, it's eroded, piece by piece, until one day you realize you're living in a glass house and the world has been watching you sleep. And for someone who had been navigating fame since childhood, that erosion carried a weight she could no longer ignore. It pushed her toward the one role she refused to fail at, the role of being a mother. Through all the scripts, premieres, and dissolving relationships, one role remained untouched by Hollywood's chaos: Diane Lane as a mother. Her daughter, Eleanor, born in 1993 during her marriage to Christopher Lambert, became the center of a world Diane refused to share with the public. If she could not shield herself from the spotlight, she would shield her child. Diane was determined not to repeat the instability of her own childhood. She had been passed back and forth between parents, raised among adults with competing agendas, always aware that her needs came second to someone else's career or dreams. Eleanor would not live like that. Diane created a home that was the opposite of a movie set: quiet, grounded, unglamorous. There were rules, but they weren't about fame. No red carpets. No interviews. No appearances just to be seen. School came first, and Eleanor's friends were from her own neighborhood, not the children of producers or actors. Even during filming, Diane arranged her schedule so she could be home as much as possible. If she had to travel, Eleanor came with her when school allowed. On location, Diane was not the Oscar-nominated actress, she was the mom making sure homework was done before bed. "We had this understanding," she once told a confidant. "The work is mine. The life is ours." There were sacrifices. Diane turned down roles, some high-profile, because they would have taken her away for too long. To the industry, it looked like she was losing momentum. To Diane, it was simply non-negotiable. "You can get another movie," she told a friend, "but you can't get back your kid's childhood." As Eleanor grew older, she became aware of her mother's fame but also of the invisible wall Diane kept between them and the world. While other celebrity children appeared in glossy magazines, Eleanor remained absent from the narrative. When the paparazzi caught them together, a grocery run, a coffee shop visit, Diane's protective body language was obvious. She was always between her daughter and the cameras, as if her very presence could shield her. Motherhood was not Diane's escape from the pain of public scrutiny, it was her anchor. It gave her a private identity no critic could dissect, no tabloid could spin. But as Eleanor moved toward adulthood, Diane faced another truth: with her daughter ready to leave the nest, there would be no buffer between her and the industry's changing view of women her age. Hollywood would soon decide how much room it still had for her, and the answer would sting in ways that no gossip column ever could. By her late 40s, Diane Lane had the resume most actors would envy: an Oscar nomination, a filmography that stretched from indie dramas to blockbuster franchises, and a reputation for intelligence and grace. But in Hollywood, there is an unspoken expiration date for women, and she could feel it creeping closer with every birthday. Scripts that once offered complexity began to shrink. Instead of fully realized protagonists, she was sent offers for the supportive wife, the worried mother, or the elegant ex, characters whose entire purpose was to orbit a male lead. The same industry that had celebrated her for unfaithful now seemed to quietly decide that her days as a leading lady were over. It wasn't just about age, it was about invisibility. In her 20s and 30s, the question was, who will Diane Lane play next? Now it was, who will she be attached to? The woman who had once shared the screen as an equal with Richard Gere, Kevin Costner, and Viggo Mortensen was suddenly relegated to roles where her presence was little more than set decoration. Friends noticed the shift in her conversations. She'd still light up when a good script came in, one recalls, but more often she'd shake her head and say, "They could have sent this to anyone." Worse was the way the business framed it as a compliment. Casting directors would praise her timeless beauty while handing her a part written as if she had no inner life. Photographers would insist on heavy retouching before her images went to print, as though the faintest sign of age would disqualify her. "You'd think being human was a flaw," she once remarked dryly to a reporter, a comment that never made it into the final article. The blockbusters she did take, like her turn as Martha Kent in Man of Steel, came with their own strange irony. The role gave her visibility, but it also reinforced Hollywood's narrowing vision for her. She could be America's mother, but no longer its romantic center. She accepted some of these roles because they allowed her to work with good directors or keep a steady rhythm in her career. But she also began to turn down projects with scripts so thin they felt like an insult. "I don't need to be in something just to prove I'm still here," she told one producer, and she meant it. Yet each no came with the risk of being forgotten in an industry that rewards constant presence. And for a woman whose career had already survived multiple reinventions, the looming question was whether this time, she could climb back into the stories that truly mattered. It was during this quiet professional narrowing that another, less visible struggle began to take root, one that had nothing to do with scripts and everything to do with her own mind. To the outside world, Diane Lane's life still looked enviable, a respected actress, financially secure, and free from the chaos of public scandals. But away from the cameras, she was grappling with something she had never prepared for, the slow, heavy pull of depression. It didn't arrive dramatically. There was no single moment when the lights went out. Instead, it crept in quietly, disguised at first as exhaustion. She began sleeping later, declining invitations, letting days pass without answering calls. Friends who had known her for decades noticed the change. She was still warm when they spoke, but less present, as if part of her was living somewhere far away. Acting, once her refuge, began to feel like a performance of happiness she could no longer sustain off-screen. She'd step onto set, slip into a role, deliver what was expected, then retreat to her trailer and sit in silence. The in-between spaces of life, the car rides, the mornings, the empty afternoons, felt heavier than they ever had before. She never spoke openly about the depth of it in interviews, perhaps because she feared it would be twisted into a headline or used to explain away her career choices. But in private, she admitted to a few trusted friends that there were days she didn't leave her bed. "I'd stare at the ceiling and feel like the world was moving without me," she told one. And part of me didn't mind. Some of it, they suspected, was the aftermath of years spent under relentless public scrutiny, the toll of constantly managing how she was perceived. Some of it was the ache of roles slipping away, the quiet reminder that Hollywood values youth in women the way it values box office returns, fleetingly. And some of it was just human, the weight of raising a daughter, surviving 2 marriages, and keeping her guard up for decades without pause. Still, Diane refused to let her lowest moments become her defining narrative. When she could, she pushed herself to work, not for the spotlight, but for the structure it provided. On good days, she would meet friends for coffee or volunteer with animal rescue groups, small acts that tethered her back to the world. But depression is a shadow that doesn't leave simply because you step into the sun. Even when she smiled for photographers or gave gracious sound bites on a press tour, there were stretches where she was simply enduring, not living. It would take a conscious shift, a deliberate reshaping of how she measured success, for her to begin clawing her way back toward the light. That shift would come slowly, through choices that had little to do with Hollywood and everything to do with reclaiming herself. It didn't happen in some grand, cinematic moment, no tearful epiphany, no triumphant montage set to swelling music. Diane Lane's return to herself began almost imperceptibly, built from small, deliberate choices that had nothing to do with chasing the next headline. First came travel. Not the kind where you're flown to a hotel for press junkets and shuttled between interviews, but the kind where you disappear into a place and no one knows your name. She spent quiet weeks in coastal towns without paparazzi, hiking alone or lingering in cafes with a notebook. Away from Los Angeles, she could go unrecognized, and in that anonymity she began to remember who she was without an audience. Then came the animals. Diane had always been drawn to them, the quiet loyalty of dogs, the unapologetic independence of cats. She began working more closely with rescue organizations, donating not just money but her time. Walking shelter dogs, fostering kittens, attending adoption fairs where no one cared about her filmography, only whether a pet was going to a good home. Animals don't see your resume, she told a volunteer. They just see if you're kind. Her work choices also shifted. She no longer felt the pressure to accept roles just to stay visible. Instead, she sought out projects that resonated on a personal level, whether or not they promised box office glory. Sometimes that meant a smaller indie film, other times, a surprising supporting role in a mainstream project. She was curating her career the way one might curate a bookshelf, carefully, intentionally, without apology. Old friends began to notice the change. She started laughing again, one said. Not the polite red carpet laugh, but the kind that makes her eyes close and her shoulders shake. The media, of course, tried to frame her reduced output as a retreat, but Diane saw it differently. It was reclamation. She was no longer letting Hollywood dictate the rhythm of her life. The days of constantly performing for an invisible jury, the critics, the gossip blogs, the fans who expected her to be frozen in time, were over. There were still shadows, of course. Depression doesn't vanish just because you've filled your days with better things. But the difference now was that she had built a life she didn't need to escape from. She was no longer bracing for the next invasion of privacy, nor waiting for the phone to ring with the right role. And in that newfound steadiness, she began to understand something she'd been circling her entire life, that survival in Hollywood isn't about staying in the spotlight. Sometimes, it's about having the courage to walk out of it entirely. By the time Diane Lane reached 60, her name carried a strange duality. In Hollywood, she was regarded with quiet reverence, a real actress who had survived the churn of child stardom, the fickleness of casting trends, and the brutality of tabloid culture. Outside the industry, she was more of a phantom, remembered in flashes, a little romance, The Outsiders, Unfaithful, Martha Kent in Man of Steel. Hers was not the legacy of an actress who dominated every decade with blockbuster hits. Instead, it was a mosaic, moments of brilliance scattered across 40 years, each one a reminder of what she could do when given the material, and how rarely Hollywood gave it to her. Some called her underrated. Others argued she preferred it that way. Diane herself seemed indifferent to the debate. She never campaigned for awards, never hired a publicist to remind the industry of her value, never staged a social media reinvention to chase the algorithms. The work spoke for itself, and if it didn't speak loudly enough for some, that was their loss. Her peers knew. They'd watched her deliver layered performances with an effortlessness that masked the discipline underneath. They knew she could take a line as simple as "I'm fine" and load it with so much subtext that it became the most truthful moment in a scene. Younger actors, especially women, often sought her out for advice on navigating fame without losing yourself. She didn't give speeches, she just listened, then offered a sentence or two that cut to the heart of the matter. But the wider culture has a way of pushing women into the margins once their faces no longer match the photos from their breakout roles. And so, despite her talent, Diane found herself written about less and less, not as a scandal, but as a symptom of an industry that has always struggled to value women beyond the surface. In interviews, when asked about legacy, she sidestepped. If someone remembers a performance of mine and it made them feel less alone, that's enough, she said once, her tone making it clear she meant it. And maybe that was the quiet brilliance of Diane Lane's career. She never clung to the spotlight, but neither did she disappear into bitterness when it moved on. She found a way to keep working on her own terms, without letting the hunger for relevance devour her. Still, there's a bittersweet truth in her story. Some of the greatest talents are not the ones we celebrate endlessly, but the ones we only realize we miss when they're gone from the screen. And Diane, for all her resilience, has always lived in that liminal space, too significant to forget, too private to ever fully know. At 60, Diane Lane lives in a way that would confuse the Hollywood machine, not because it's complicated, but because it's simple. She has no interest in rebranding herself for Instagram followers or plotting a late career comeback. She works when the role feels worth her time. She disappears when it doesn't. Her home life is private, the details intentionally vague. She spends time with her daughter, now an adult carving her own path, and close friends who have known her long enough not to see her as Diane Lane, actress, but simply Diane. She travels when she wants to, slipping into places where no one recognizes her. She still works with animal rescues, quietly funding shelter upgrades and sponsoring adoption events without asking for credit. What she has, more than accolades or magazine covers, is freedom, the kind she was chasing when she ran away at 15, but which she had to spend decades learning how to hold on to. Looking back, the arc of her life is not one of meteoric rise and fall, but of survival. Surviving childhood fame. Surviving the industry's attempts to box her in. Surviving marriages that collapsed under their own weight. Surviving the press when it circled like a vulture. And surviving herself in the years when depression made every day feel like an uphill climb. She's not unscarred. The years have left their marks, in her guardedness, in the way she sometimes hesitates before trusting, in her instinct to keep the most important parts of her life out of reach from anyone who might commodify them. But the difference now is that the scars are hers, not the industry's. There's a quiet defiance in the way she's chosen to age, not with denial, but with ownership. She doesn't chase the image of her 20-something self, because that girl was still learning how to survive. The woman she is now doesn't have to. And maybe that's the heart of Diane Lane's tragedy, and her triumph. The tragedy is that the world never saw the full scope of what she could do, because the industry wasn't built to give women like her the space to keep proving it. The triumph is that she learned to stop needing their permission. She may never have been Hollywood's most visible star. She may never dominate the greatest of all time lists or draw the kind of obsessive retrospectives given to some of her peers. But she has something rarer, a life she can live on her own terms, free from the tyranny of constant visibility. And in a town where everyone is running toward the light, maybe the bravest thing Diane Lane ever did was walk, deliberately, unapologetically, into the shade.